Welcome to NCSS Here for You. Since 1958, Northwestern Counseling and Support Services has been providing access to high-quality services which promote healthy living and emotional well-being to the residents of Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Over the years, as the needs of the community have changed, so too have the programs and services that we make available to assist children, adolescents, adults, families, and seniors. We take our role in the community seriously and strive to provide the highest quality services. According to Eric Erickson, a noted developmental psychologist, every person must pass through a series of 8 interrelated stages over the entire life cycle. NCSS provides a continuum of services to meet the needs of individuals who at any point seek assistance. NCSS's purpose is creating a stronger community, one person at a time. Now, let's get to today's show.
I'm Joe Halko, Director of Community Relations for Northwestern Counseling and Support Services, and welcome to another episode of NCSS Here for You. Each month in this program, we discuss a human services topic, and we do that with staff from one of our 3 service divisions. Our 3 service divisions are Behavioral Health Services, Children, Youth and Family Services, and Developmental Services. And on occasion, we have guests from organizations that NCSS collaborates with throughout the year. This month's episode is titled Clinical Programming in Developmental Services. There are numerous clinical programs in support of individuals and their families, ranging from individual and family counseling and dialectical behavior therapy skills training to biofeedback therapy and family life and sexual health services. In addition, committees addressing clinical oversight, communications, crisis, and behavioral support plan review ensure that quality clinical services are being offered and maintained in the Developmental Services Division. To discuss this subject in greater detail, I'm pleased to introduce this month's guests, and they are Kathy Brown, Director of Developmental Services Division, and Amber Schaeffler, Developmental Services Program Manager. I'd like to welcome both of you to the program. So let's begin with, what clinical services do you provide?
Over the last 2 years, we've been working very hard in developmental services to really build our clinical programming. We have 2 licensed social workers, 1 licensed mental health counselor, and a certified rehabilitation counselor that oversee our programming. We provide individual, family, and group counseling. We also provide dialectical behavior therapy, as you mentioned, DBT, biofeedback therapy, therapeutic options training, FLASH, which is family life and sexual health. We have a strong internship program where we accept students from psychology, human services, and also the medical industry, nursing. We have a DS crisis team, and we've developed internal review and quality oversight committees, 3 in particular that Amber oversees herself. The Clinical Oversight Committee, which really is about accessibility to individuals and families and service coordinators for clinical needs. The Behavioral Support Plan Review Committee, which oversees human rights and making sure that behavioral plans are written in the least restrictive manner, in respectful language to the individual. And a Communications Committee, which oversees our facilitated communication, our picture boards, and our advanced technology like iPad use.
Mm-hmm. Now, can you describe in more detail the therapeutic programs?
Sure. So, as Kathy said, we have 2 licensed clinical social workers, 1 licensed clinical mental health worker, and a certified rehabilitation counselor who can provide individual, couples, and family counseling. As for dialectical behavior therapy, DBT skills group, we tend to offer that twice a year because it tends to run about 16 weeks at a time. And in that group, participants can learn skills such as communicating their feelings, relieving stress, how to have good relationships, and pretty much dealing with the past.
Now, Amber, with that going 16 weeks, is that where they meet? Is it once a week that they meet for 16 weeks? Mm-hmm. Is that how that works?
Yes.
Okay, so you have a continuity to it over a long span of time.
Mm-hmm. And if we need a little bit longer, we can go a little bit longer as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you ever found that in the past that you've had to?
Yeah, it depends on the group. Mm-hmm.
I think group membership runs typically 8 to 10 individuals in a group.
Mm-hmm.
So it really also has a peer flavor to it. So they're learning skills, but they're also able to bounce what they're able to do off each other, and we find that to be really therapeutic as well.
I would imagine the whole scenario of groups is critical. Just thinking in terms of these individuals and how and their struggles, that to really have other individuals in a contained group to be able to share is probably, I would imagine, extremely beneficial.
And from a clinical standpoint, learning to facilitate groups, that takes time and it takes experience. And so we often mentor our new counselors. When they're coming in, they'll join the DBT group so that they get that experience of facilitating larger groups. I think the next thing that we're really excited about is our biofeedback therapy. Traditional talk therapy does not always work well for individuals with intellectual disabilities. So biofeedback helps individuals develop self-regulation skills through rhythmic breath training. You apply sensors to different body modalities, and it gives immediate feedback on a computer screen that allows the individual to learn how to synchronize their breathing with their heart rate. That allows control of the autonomic nervous system through the different modalities, such as measuring muscle tension, heart rate, respiration rate, skin temperature. It helps them to gain awareness of their autonomic nervous system that otherwise is subconscious, and when they get stressed, they get aroused and they don't know how to regulate that. So it brings it into a conscious level. The individuals receive that feedback right on the screen in front of them through graphs, displays, games, or sounds that they can see, and they get that sensory feel for. And it really allows them to start to gain control of their breathing, which brings down their heart rate, which helps them to regulate in a way that they've never been able to do before. It's typically used in reducing headaches, anxiety, insomnia. It's used for chronic pain. It's used with our vets for PTSD, and it's also used in anger management. So it has a lot of different uses. It's just a whole different way of doing therapy with someone who traditional talk therapy just doesn't seem to work for them. The other training that we have is our therapeutic options training. That is training for all of our DS staff. It's a mandatory training that they take every year. It provides strategies to work with individuals that may be struggling emotionally. It's a hands-off approach. It's evidence-based, it's person-centered, relationship-driven, and simplified, it's a respectful strategy that validates a person's needs in the moment. It allows them a voice to express themselves in a very safe environment without being judged. And the last one we're going to talk about is FLASH, which is Family Life and Sexual Health. One of the number one requests that we receive from transitioning youths and their families is how to help their young adult child build a relationship. Not just peer friendships, but sexually healthy sexual relationships. That's something that typically is not learned in school programs. So we find ourselves being stewards of safe and healthy sexual relationships, building it for the first time in an adult's life. So the FLASH class gives us a curriculum. It works with the families, it works with their natural support systems. It helps to educate everyone that people with intellectual disabilities have a right to a sexual relationship, a healthy relationship. It addresses physical development, it addresses sexual health, interpersonal relationships, body image, and gender roles.
So quite extensive is
It
the
is.
trainings that the Developmental Services offers.
Yes.
And you're right, Kathy, when you think of those with intellectual disabilities, they all want to live their life as independently and as regular as they can within their means. And a lot of times they just, of course, need that assistance to be able to understand and figure things out.
And clinicians will find themselves in a place where they're supporting parents for the first time who have an adult child coming to them and telling them, I want to get married. this is my partner and I want to be married. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge for everyone to learn how to build those healthy, lasting relationships. So it's exciting, and our staff find it really rewarding work when they see people actually move independently into their own lives and families.
Now, let's talk a little bit about oversight. So, what type of quality oversight do you provide for clinical services?
Well, we have an internal clinical oversight committee, and that consists of all the counselors that do provide therapy, individual, family, and couples counseling, as well as 2 master level clinicians and 2 staff members who have extensive knowledge in the field. So we meet weekly, and the committee meets with teams who have people they serve who have behaviors that interfere with their growth, development, and achievement of their goals. So we meet with them, and we find ways to keep people safe and to develop behavior support plans that ensure people's rights are protected. Okay. And then we also have a behavior support plan review committee that it consists of myself and 3 services coordinators, and we review behavior support plans. And behavior support plans are based on positive strategies to support behavior change. The plan consists of about 30 questions, so we gather quite a lot of information so that we have that so we can address behaviors. And then the other quality oversight we have is the communications committee. And this consists of experienced staff who have knowledge in various communication methods. Some examples would be sign language, facilitated communication, apps for iPads. The list goes on. Those are just a few. And so the purpose of the committee is to ensure that we promote communication, that we give the support and resources that people need to have their communication needs met. And we also provide ongoing support, not only weekly when we review communication plans, but we're there when people need us.
Wouldn't you say within the state of the designated mental health agencies that NCSS probably has the best program when it comes to the communications for those that require it? And that's whether it's deaf and hard of hearing, or you look at all the different factors that some people have to deal with as far as communication barriers and how they can be overcome.
We're definitely a leader in the state for communication, for sure.
Now, Kathy, do you want to?
I was going to say that one of the things that we have found is that typically when we are seeing frustration with individuals that we work with, it is due to their inability to be able to communicate effectively. And someone who has worked with them their whole life may understand what it is they're trying to communicate. Our job is to make sure, no matter where they are in the community, our job is to integrate them and give them the ability to communicate with people so that level of frustration goes down. And that's what this committee is really exceptional. They reach out and look for those individuals who are really struggling at getting their message heard, and they find different modalities for them to be able to communicate in the community.
Now, can you describe the crisis services of Developmental Services?
I can. Our crisis team is 24/7, so it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and their job is really emergency stabilization. The oversight is with myself and Amber. Amber's our clinical consult, and there are 8 DS staff that rotate on-call shifts. The role of the crisis worker is really to support. It's a support that embraces cooperation and collaboration with those who are in crisis and with their teams in order to stabilize the situation in the least restrictive and the most respectful way. So they need to go into a situation, they need to evaluate and assess it, they need to evaluate safety first, and then they need to stabilize the individual. And sometimes that means they need to remove them from the situation. They need to separate individuals who are in a heated situation. They assess it, and then they stabilize the individual, and then they come up with a safety plan. And then they're able to step back and follow up the following day. The mission statement is really about empowerment and respect of the individual to express themselves in a supportive environment so that they can regain balance. A lot of times when someone's in a crisis, they have felt invalidated and they have felt that they have not been able to express what their need is in that moment. And their job isn't to judge whether that need is something that can be fulfilled or not. It's to validate and listen in a non-judgmental way. The values of the team is to be responsive, confidential. Confidentiality is critical. When someone's in a crisis, the last thing they need is to come into services the next day and to have everyone know what crisis event occurred the night before. So it is a crisis worker's job to speak with the team members and the team members only in order to support that individual, not to broadcast the individual's crisis event. Safety is always a priority. Respect of the individual and professional accountability. So knowing that as a crisis worker, you have to hold yourself accountable to a certain standard. You are there to support that person first and foremost, to get them stabilized, and then to support the team afterwards in giving them the information that they need. So I think the bottom line is they're really there to stabilize the environment, to come up with a safety plan for that next 24 hours, and that's really the window that they're looking at, and then to follow up the next day with the natural supports and the team for that individual. So they're not there to solve a problem, they're there to stabilize the situation and the individual.
Kathy, you brought up confidentiality, and I think that's something that perhaps we want to touch on, because so often I think other organizations think that there's certain information that NCSS personnel just don't want to share, when the reality is it's not that they don't want to share it, it's that because of laws and rules and regulations, there are certain things that can't be shared. Could you just comment to that a little bit? Because I think it's important that people understand it isn't NCSS that's just mandating that. It's powers that are separate from our organization that require that.
I mean, we certainly have both federal and state regulations, HIPAA regulations, that mandate that we hold people's personal health information at a very high standard. So, and I'll give you a really good example. We can be working with an individual who may be 22 years old and they're their own guardian, and their mom or dad or their sibling might call us and want to know what event occurred, what happened. If we don't have consent from that 22-year-old to speak to mom or dad or to the sibling, we cannot give them that information. I understand as a mother myself what that would probably feel like, but we are held to the same standard that you would want your medical doctor held to or your therapist held to. They have a right to their confidentiality. So we try up front to figure out who that team is and to get consent in place so that we know who it is they want as part of their natural supports, and we're able to have those discussions with, and we know who they do not want us to have those discussions with. But we're a small community, so people recognize we work for NCSS. You want to be able to have a way to respond to people respectfully without breaching someone's privacy.
Now, what does cross-divisional collaboration look like for you?
That is where the divisions get together monthly and we talk about different topics. Topics such as the implementation of multiple screening tools, maybe depression, suicide risk assessments. We also follow up on trauma initiatives and updates on the most current guidelines of state regulations in multiple areas, just to make sure we're all current with that.
You know, Amber, you mentioned trauma, and I think that's another area that people sometimes don't realize. There can be individuals who have been in one traumatic situation, or maybe they've been in multiple situations, and the effect that that has on them in seeking treatments and their ability to be cooperative, because trauma, depending on where somebody sits, can be life-altering for people. How do you find that people that have really struggled with trauma are able to kind of overcome some of that with the assistance that we provide?
Well, we're quite fortunate that we have counselors and developmental services who work with people with intellectual disabilities, so we have an understanding and we can provide that specialized service to them. Not all agencies have that, so because they have options to see people here at NCSS, I find that helpful.
Yeah. Now, how do the clinical services support person-centered choices for individuals that we serve?
So I think person-centered programming is key to developmental services. That is what we are charged with, making sure the person is always in the forefront. So I think the fact that we help individuals gain insight into their strengths as well as their struggles, it's a positive approach. So we've identified, here are your strengths, here are the tools that you already have, and here are some areas you're struggling. So let's see if we can't build up those supports. That kind of knowledge allows us to support real skill building, and it gives them a power. It gives them a choice because they have these tools to access, they've learned these new skills, so when they're in a situation, they've now have some power and choice in selecting what to do and what route to take. And finally, I think we're great at doing ongoing support to individuals served, their families, their home providers, their service coordinators. So we know what's working and what's not, and we collaborate.
So an example of how we might approach a situation, we had a team come to the Clinical Oversight Committee and they were serving a person that had self-harming behaviors. So the first step was asking them to go and get a medical evaluation to make sure there wasn't a medical underlying issue that was causing the behaviors. They did that, that was ruled out. So our next step is data collection, seeing if there's a pattern in behaviors so that we can address it. I always find it's better to have simple to use data tracking forms because the more complicated it is, it's not as user-friendly.
Sure, sure.
So they collected the data and then they came back and we were able to analyze it and see patterns and then develop positive behavior support strategies. And so that's just one of the approaches that we may use.
Now, what would you like to see developed in the future in providing clinical services?
Well, we would like to offer biofeedback to the general public, not only developmental services, once we get that off the ground. We'd also like to implement neurofeedback. Neurofeedback is a type of biofeedback that measures the brain waves to teach self-regulation, and it uses some of the same tools that Kathy was talking about with biofeedback. And we'd also like to expand our sensory exploration program. And these activities help people calm their bodies, exercise certain senses, and help them develop skills in their daily lives when they encounter a situation that's an overload of stimulation for them. So it's a tailored program for individual needs. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So the facilitator meets with them and sees what their specific needs are and then develops the activities.
We also have developed a DBT skills training for our direct line staff, families, and home providers and service coordinators. We find that we've focused on giving DBT skills to the individuals we serve, but we haven't expanded that circle, so they're not using common language, common skills. The individual understands DBT, but that natural support system also needs to understand the basics so that they can give them consistent practice at learning self-regulation. So that's our next rollout. And the last thing we're looking at is integrated listening systems, ILS. It's based on principles that the brain is able to change in response to stimulation. So ILS provides gentle and specific stimulation in order to activate neural pathways. And basically, I actually did it myself to get a feel for it. And I was on a balancing sphere and I had headphones playing very calming music while I was throwing a sensory tool back and forth. So it was multiple stimulation, and it opens up your ability to your neurological pathways, and it gives you the ability to, instead of have rigid directed thinking, it expands. So I found it extremely challenging. At the same time, really a fun approach to sensory. So we're looking into that, and we have someone who's going for certification in that very shortly as well.
Well, that sounds excellent. So a lot of great programming that has been provided in the past, and also looking to some very interesting methods and methodologies that can be used in the future. And as Amber said, not only to help those with intellectual disabilities, but perhaps across other divisions as well, with what they're trying to do as far as their help with individuals.
Yep.
Well, I know it's probably hard to believe, but our time is up for this month. I want to thank my guests, Kathy Brown and Amber Schaeffler, for being on the show today and sharing their insights on the clinical services that are provided by the Developmental Services Division. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for spending time with us again this month. You can learn more about NCSS and all of our programs and services by logging on to ncssinc.org. I'm Joe Halko, and I'll be back next month with another episode of NCSS Here for You.
This has been another episode of NCSS Here for You. We hope that you found today's discussion informative and educational. Since 1958, Northwestern Counseling and Support Services has been providing access to high-quality services which promote healthy living and emotional well-being to the residents of Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Over the years, as the needs of the community have changed, so too have the programs and services that we make available to assist children, adolescents, adults, families, and seniors. Thanks once again for tuning in this month. NCSS's purpose remains creating a stronger community, one person at a time.